Hearing the news that Ace passed, that was very sad for me. With the circumstances of how he passed, that was also tragic in its own respect because he did have plans to keep going and he was going to release more music, and his solo music is good. It is not something that's, it is has merit. It is very solid in its respect. These four members of Kiss, these four characters are larger than life to me, especially growing up. I have Kiss comic books. I have 34 Kiss records. I have CDs. I have Mr. Potato Heads. I had a little Kiss Lego set at one point. I had little figurines of Kiss. I even went as Gene Simmons for Halloween when I was in the fourth grade. So, been a huge Kiss fan my whole life. What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Welcome in today to episode number 42 of the program. Today is Tuesday, November 25th at the time of this recording. It is Thanksgiving week. Want to wish everybody who is listening a happy Thanksgiving. I do not know when this episode is going to come out exactly, but at time of recording, it is Thanksgiving week. I hope that everybody has a happy Thanksgiving with their family and their friends and enjoys this lovely holiday where we get together and give thanks. Today's topic on the program, we will be talking about a rock and roll legend who sadly passed away earlier this year. I'm, of course, talking about Mr. Ace Frehley, the lead guitarist, co-founding member of Kiss. He's one of several lead guitarists for Kiss, but obviously the original, the main lead guitarist, one of the founding members. Ace was incredibly impactful on my music listening, even on some of my guitar playing. I'm no pro by any means, but I do, dabble a little bit. And when I was learning early on, a lot of his riffs and a lot of those early Kiss songs were things that I wanted to play. And we'll talk about more of those stories as we get into the details here of sort of my tribute here to Ace Frehley, taking some time just to talk about his legacy and just my thoughts on his career and his impact in music. Talking a little bit about the details, Ace did pass away this year on October the 16th. As I mentioned, he was one of the founding members of Kiss, which is one of my favorite groups. As you can see on this wall behind me of records, there's probably, let me open up my Discogs here to get the exact count of how many Kiss albums I have, just to show behind me here, a couple more that I have picked out, just displayed on my wall off camera here. But we have Dynasty here. This was the kind of the disco Kiss album. This is where Kiss went a little more disco. Some people would say they sold out at this point. But on this album, we do see Ace have more of a involvement, which is why I had it sort of picked out. And we'll talk about some of these songs as we get into the episode. But songs like 2000 Man, which is a Rolling Stones cover, and then Hard Times and Save Your Love, more songwriting involvement for Ace. Not just songwriting, he was always really involved with songwriting from the jump, but more so songs that he was singing on. A couple Ace solo albums here. This was with his band after Kiss, Frehley's Comet. This is their debut album. It's a little beat up, but we got it for cheap, so that is always a good bargain. But songs like Rock Soldiers, Breakout, Something Moved, these tracks were definitely, they were popular in the 80s. They had their moment, but we see Frehley's Comet there on the back. Ace, we'll talk about this in more detail as we go through the show, but his solo career of, the Kiss members was definitely the most successful, I would say. And then we have here a Frehley's Comet live album. This was recorded at the Hammersmith Odeon in London, England on March 19th, 1988. Played some of his solo tunes from that 1978 solo album that I showed at the top of the episode, and some old classic Kiss tunes like Cold Gin, Shock Me, and Rocket Ride. So Ace was a legend in his own right. I pulled up the number here. I have 34 Kiss releases on my shelf behind me. Maybe someday we'll do an episode where I talk about every single one, how I acquired it, what I think of that album. That could be a fun little episode to do there. But talking a little bit about Ace and his legacy today, talking more about, to start, his tragic death. He did pass away, sadly, on October 16th of this year. I remember hearing the news. I had seen news that he had suffered a fall, that he was injured in some respect. He was hospitalized from that. Didn't know the severity of it at first. And then shortly after that, the news that he had passed away had came out. Suffered blunt trauma to the head due to a fall. It was an accidental death. Sad circumstances for sure, given everything that he was working on in his career at that point. He was planning on another album. I think it was going to be called 10,000 Volts Part 2. He was going to, I believe, embark on future tours. He had more career left, more life left to live, and to have it suffer, he wasn't sick. He didn't have cancer. He didn't have a disease where we kind of knew he was going to pass away eventually. But he had rather a traumatic incident where he fell, suffered an injury, and he died. And that was I remember that being pretty shocking for myself, that being kind of, I was caught off guard. Kiss, as I've touched on here, is one of my favorite bands. They were really the first rock band that I got into. I have been listening to Kiss since I was in the first grade. In fact, talking about Ace tunes, one of the earliest songs that I can remember listening to is Ace's cover of New York Groove, which was a big hit off his solo album released in 1978. To give some context to this album, Kiss first album comes out in 74. They work to, they build up their success. Alive comes out in 1975. The band recently released a 50-year anniversary box set for that with a lot of previously never before released content. And the band keeps growing and growing. Then they release Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, Love Gun in 77. Summer of 77, Love Gun comes out. The band's touring, the band's really getting big, but I think at that time they were also getting sick of one another. And so to try and ease the tension within the group, they say, okay, let's all take a little break. Let's go our separate ways. Let's make all solo albums with the plan of coming back. So 1978, all 4 Kiss members released a solo album. They all were released on the big day, on the same day. It was a big marketing ploy. It was a big deal back then. I remember seeing ads for it. Obviously not in 78. I'm not that old, but on YouTube or things like that. And this was Ace's release. The tracks go as follows: Rip It Out, Speeding Back to My Baby, Snowblind, Ozone, What's on Your Mind, New York Groove, I'm in Need of Love, Wiped Out, and Fractured Mirror. This album was produced by Eddie Kramer. Eddie Kramer famously had worked with Jimi Hendrix. I believe he also had worked with Led Zeppelin, and he had worked with Kiss. He produced Alive, their live album that really catapulted them to success. But Ace's solo album here had the most commercial success of the group. If you look on forums online, if you read people's opinion, they will often say that this is the best Kiss solo album, and I have to concur with that opinion. I think that at that point in the band, Ace was starting to find his legs more. On the 1977 release Love Gun, sings on a track for the first time, and as I touched on at their 1979 release Dynasty, he sings on 3 or 4 songs. His voice within the group was growing, and I think his ability to stand on his own was really clear and apparent on this 1978 release. Back to my little story with the song New York Groove, which is a cover song. It was the first grade. It was the first time I remember hearing music. It's my mom and I. We're going to school. She's going to take me to school, which, because my mom is a teacher and I went to her school, so she would take me to school when she would just go to work. So she's going to work, I'm going to school. We're going to the same place. And so we're in the driveway of our family home, and she loves music. She is a big part of the reason why I listen to music to this day. We've been to several Kiss concerts together. We've been to several other concerts together. I love going to shows with my mom, love the music that she has passed on to me. So we're in the driveway, we're in the family minivan. I'm in the back seat, she's in the driver's seat, of course. And she puts on an Ace Frehley. It's not the solo album. I actually might have it. I don't have it. It is a Kiss Icons set. It's a 4 CD set titled Kiss Icons. It is each member has a dedicated disc within that pack. It was released around 2008, I think. So there's the Gene. It has some of Gene's solo album, but some of his stuff he takes the lead vocals on, or some of his main contributions within the band. Same thing for Paul, same thing for Peter, and same thing for Ace. And one of the tracks on there is New York Groove, which technically is an Ace Frehley song, but if I'll hold this up again here, you see they brand it with Kiss. So it's a solo album, but the members are still within Kiss, and they all dedicated it to one another, to Gene, Ace, Paul, and Peter, but I'm not sure if that's actually how they felt at the time. But anyway, so New York Groove, we're in the car, and she puts on that Kiss Icons CD. And if you're familiar with the song New York Groove, it's got a very distinct beat, which I saw in an interview recently, an older interview with Ace, that he was talking about. Nowadays, it's like a stomping sound. This sound you would create with a drum machine. But back then, this is 1978. Technology was a little different, so they're just stomping on boxes at that. So that I just remember that beat so distinctly. And then Ace's guitar comes in with a really swagger kind of driven riff. It's got a little, I call it tang to it. And I just remember going to school, just listening to that. And that is one of the first instances I can recall of listening to music. And I remember, I don't remember it picture perfect, but I can picture it in my head. I can piece together sort of what that scene was like. And from there on, I listened to tons of Kiss. My mom specifically is the big Kiss fan. She had a bunch of their CDs lying around that I would play and listen to. I remember, I'll pull this up here. I had, it was one year for Christmas. They had asked me what I wanted, and I found this item online, just browsing the internet. I would watch Kiss videos on YouTube. I would watch music videos. I would listen to the songs. I would watch interviews with the band, from, the famous Tom Snyder interview to the reunion interviews. I would watch it all. I remember watching when their reunion tour began in 1996. They did a show in Detroit at Tiger Stadium. The Shouted Out Loud live version at Tiger Stadium 1996 is one of my favorite live instances of Kiss. But speaking of live stuff, I remember one Christmas asking for this 4 CD box set, Kiss Alive 1975 to 2000. It features Alive 1, that iconic album that, as I mentioned, catapulted Kiss to their success. And we'll have to do an episode on that um, at some point to talk about the impact that album had on Kiss in their career. This box set also featured Alive 2, which was the sequel to Alive. That came out in 1977. It featured Alive 3. 1993 is when that came out. So a different era of Kiss, no makeup Kiss, no Ace Frehley, no Peter Criss. And then it had a Kiss Alive, the Millennium Concert, which was recorded on December 31st, 1999, as they were going to bring in the new millennia in Vancouver, Canada. And that was part of the reunion tour. So that had the original 4 members back together, playing a different era of Kiss, but still the same 4 original members. So I remember getting this. I would put together like set lists. I remember writing out, like, as if I was a concert promoter or planning a concert, writing out my set lists of this song we're going to open with, and this song's and it was all Kiss. And so Kiss was a huge band for me in my early years, my formative years of listening to music. And I remember New York Groove that day, going to first grade, listening to that, and the rest, as they say, is history. So hearing the news that Ace passed, that was very sad for me. With the circumstances of how he passed, that was also tragic in its own respect, because he did have plans to keep going, and he was going to release more music, and his solo music is good. It is not something that's, has merit. It is very solid in its respect. These 4 members of Kiss, these 4 characters, are larger than life to me, especially growing up. I have Kiss comic books. I have 34 Kiss records. I have CDs. I have Mr. Potato Heads. I had a little Kiss Lego set at one point. I had little figurines of Kiss. I even went as Gene Simmons for Halloween when I was in the 4th grade. So been a huge Kiss fan my whole life. Talking now a little bit about Ace's life. He was born in the Bronx, gets his start with Kiss, goes to audition. He sees an ad. I think it's in the Village Voice, because if I remember correctly, Ace sees the ad in the Village Voice, and then Peter Criss sees an ad in Rolling Stone magazine. So Ace sees an ad in Village Voice. He goes to audition for Gene, Paul, and Peter. And he was wearing, on the day of his audition, he's wearing a red shoe and an orange shoe, I think. So he's already got this interesting character that Ace is known as, that adds to his origin story. And I believe he plays Deuce for them, or what would become the song Deuce off the first Kiss record. And he's playing this, and he eventually gets the job. A lot of Ace's playing is it's very inspirational to a lot of future players. Ace was very inspiring to a lot of people. Some that come to mind, a lot of the guys in Pearl Jam. So Mike McCready, the Pearl Jam lead guitarist, huge Kiss fan. No, I believe Matt Cameron, who was in Soundgarden and also in Pearl Jam, was a big Kiss fan as well. Some others, see Kiss as kind of hokey or a little gimmicky, but when they were younger, they were a big driving force for a lot of people to pick up a guitar. So I've seen a lot of people talking about that since Ace's passing. How many people picked up a guitar because of Ace Frehley? We'll never know the exact number, but that just speaks to kind of his influence. And all of this is more impressive when you think about the fact that Ace did not take guitar lessons. He did not, have any formal training when it came to playing the guitar, which, as somebody who did take guitar lessons, I could not imagine doing that without guitar lessons, even having that motivation to pick up the guitar. That would be a challenge. That would be knowing where to start, knowing proper technique. But, Ace is proof that if you have, it in you, so to speak, and you don't have to worry about the technicalities, that you can achieve success and you can, be a rock star and be in one of the biggest bands in the land. So Ace is with Kiss from he auditions in 72. He gets in the band in 73. Their first album comes out February of 74. And then he's with the band through 82 on the first stint. That is 82 is when the Creatures of the Night album comes out. That album's interesting because Ace's face appears on the cover. So we see here that Ace's face is on the cover here, but he does not actually play on any of these songs. So kind of a unique circumstance there. But that was kind of the end of Ace. But he played on their most legendary material, Kiss, the debut album, Hotter Than Hell, Dressed to Kill, both of the original Alives, Destroyer. These are songs like Detroit Rock City, Love Gun, Rock and Roll All Night, Hotter Than Hell, Cold Gin, Strutter, 100,000 Years, even songs like I Was Made for Loving You, which is a really kind of a big hit internationally. And then, he sticks with the band. Peter does leave, so Ace sticks it out, stays a little bit through the Eric Carr era. And then right around the time when Creatures of the Night comes out, Ace goes a separate way, kind of is just burnt out, I think, just had enough, leaves the band eventually. He's replaced by Vinnie Vincent, who's then replaced by Mark St. John and Bruce Kulick. Ace does eventually rejoin the band, as I kind of touched on. 1996, the band has a reunion. What actually precedes this, let me get this real quick, is they do an Unplugged album. So back in the 90s, MTV did a bunch of Unplugged shows. I'm sure some of the listeners here are familiar with that. Nirvana has a very famous Unplugged set, Alice in Chains. A lot of the grunge bands were really the big names in the Unplugged space because that's what was popular at the time. But Kiss did an MTV Unplugged. I remember not buying this album, but I bought a CD of it at a buybacks, which I don't even know if those are around anymore. But I bought it on a vinyl pressing. This is significant because the band that was Kiss at the time, which was Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Bruce Kulick, and Eric Singer, those four play an MTV Unplugged set. They play the set, they play, 12, 15 songs, whatever. And then Ace and Peter are brought out. This is in 95. So Ace is brought out. They sing the song 2000 Man. Peter does Beth. And then they do Nothing to Lose and Rock and Roll All Night, kind of close it out. And that's a big fanfare. That's a big moment because 95 to the last time all four played together, I think, was 1980. So it had been 15 years since those guys had been together. And that momentum just builds. And then 1996, they announce we're doing a huge reunion tour. Kiss was no makeup at that time, too. So many people recognize Kiss for their iconic makeup, but they had taken it off in 1983 for the Lick It Up album. They had a long no makeup stretch of about 12 years or so. And then they put the makeup back on. They tour the world. They make tons of money. Ace is in the band from 1996 to 2002. His last performance with Kiss in makeup is the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. at Salt Lake City in Utah. So, 96 through when Psycho Circus comes out, which when the original four is back together, they decided to do an album. From some interviews I've seen with Ace, when around the recording of Psycho Circus and when they decide to go forward with that project, that is kind of when the vibe sort of shifted. Ace and Peter felt maybe they weren't being treated with a lot of respect. They felt that they were being seen just as not as partners, not as equal partners in the group, but just as, they're just going to go and do whatever Gene and Paul say. Gene and Paul are driving this bus completely. Whether that's fair or not, I'm not really here to rehash right now. Just really here to talk more about Ace and his career and some of my favorite moments and just talk about that. So Psycho Circus comes out. Ace does have a song, Into the Void, that he sings on there. I do not have that one on vinyl, but I do have it on CD somewhere around here. So they go on, they do a couple more live things. They do a live album, the Millennium Concert, that comes out in 2000. So then what happens? They do the reunion tour, 96, 97. They go into the studio around 98. They do Psycho Circus. That album comes out. They tour to support the album. So they do the Psycho Circus tour. And then they say, well, we're having some success with this. The idea at the time was this is going to be it. Let's do a farewell tour. So Kiss is kind of famous for this. A lot of bands have done this over the years where they get back together, they do a farewell tour, and then they come back and do it again. More recently, I think like Motley Crue is a great example of a band that I want to say it was maybe 2013, it was the mid 2010s, they were going to be done. And then, within the last 5 years, they've come back. And nowadays, I'm going to just flat out say it, they suck. They're up there lip syncing. They're not even actually playing their music. This is all just a huge cash grab. So I will never see Motley Crue at the state they're in. Kiss is guilty of kind of the same thing. However, my love for Kiss is a little different than with Motley Crue. So anyway, in 1998, they do a farewell tour, still the four original members. In the early 2000s, things start to get rocky between Peter and the rest of the band. I believe there's a contract dispute, so Peter does leave. Eric Singer comes back, who was with the band in the mid-90s. He was Eric Carr's replacement after Eric Carr passes away of heart cancer. Eric Singer puts on the cat face makeup, which that riles up a lot of Kiss fans, a lot of the hardcore OG fans. People like your Eddie Trunks of the world, they don't really like that. It's sort of an imposter thing. Not a ridiculous opinion. I don't think that's unfair by any stretch. And then in 2002, Ace does depart the band as well, and he is replaced by Tommy Thayer, who also dons the spaceman makeup, which is synonymous with Ace. Nobody else had worn that makeup within the group. So significant turn of events in the early 2000s. A lot of people really only acknowledge the original four members as being Kiss. They don't acknowledge a lot of these other members that were brought in to keep the band going. For me, I was lucky enough to see Kiss 4 times before they retired at the end of 2023. So I first Kiss concert was in the summer of 2014. They were opening. No, they were not opening. So they were doing a doubleheader show, a tour. It was their 40th anniversary tour, I think, with Def Leppard. So I saw Def Leppard and Kiss the same night, which was a pretty cool thing for a 13-year-old kid. So I got to see Kiss. That was my first time. Again, all of my experience with Kiss was in the Tommy Thayer era. I am as a kid who was really into Kiss, I am grateful for Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer for allowing the band to keep going so that I had an opportunity to see them, to see the whole stage show, the breathing fire, the Paul Stanley flying out into the crowd, him smashing his guitar, Gene flying up into the rafters, the smoke, the fireworks, the bombs, all that comes with a Kiss show. I got the chance to see that several times. And if it was not for Tommy and Eric Singer, I would not have got that chance. So that's sort of my take on those members within the group. But revisiting Ace, Ace, he had a tough, he was kind of a street tough, I guess you could say. He got expelled from schools. He was, almost didn't get his diploma. He just kind of sort of almost joined the gang life, I hear, before music kind of was his calling. And and pushed him, gave him some direction in life. And he would go back to school to get his diploma back in the 70s. Worked some odd end jobs. He was a cab driver at one point. I think that may have been, I think him and Paul worked for the same cab company. I remember, I believe, hearing that in one of the Kiss documentaries I've watched over the years. So just working in New York City, trying to make it big. Auditions for this band. They're not even called Kiss at this point. They named themselves Kiss in 73. He auditions in 72. He designed the band's logo, so his fingerprints are truly all over this band, and he starts writing songs from the get-go. So he's in the band till 82. Of impact on their sound. He's really, truly a fan favorite. Talking about sort of how fans view Kiss and their different personalities. A lot of people view Paul and Gene as the money types. They're the business of the group, and Ace and Peter, they're the music. They're the soul of the band. Whatever people want to say. There might be some truth to that. Gene definitely is known for his different business ventures that he has entered into, his marketing, his branding. He'll slap his name on just about anything, it seems. So that's where a lot of that derives from. Back in the 70s, it was massive, the Kiss phenomenon. There was action dolls, there was comic books, there was lunchboxes, there was everything Kiss. Whereas Ace, was seen more of the rock and roll attitude, the purely about the music, not in it for the money or the fame, like how some people viewed Paul and Gene. Whether that's true or not, that's up to you to kind of decide. That's up to your personal opinion. I think Paul and Gene are very talented musicians, and I think that, especially back in the 70s, if it was just left up to Ace and Peter, Kiss would not have gone on to do nearly as much as they did, and that would have left them far less successful. I think Paul and Gene had a drive to get to the highest level, and they were very aggressive in their pursuit of success. But this is not to demean Ace at all. Ace certainly was inspiring to many guitar players. He certainly was someone who added key elements to Kiss's sound, whether it be through his sort of iconic, like, I believe Gene calls them like dinosaur bends, where they sound like Godzilla almost. Some of his, screeching solos, his work on their live album is some of my favorite from him. And talking about some of my favorite Ace moments, I wrote up a list here. I've been listening to some Ace the past couple days in preparation for this episode, and just wanted to kind of go through my list and talk about these different moments. I've been doing some research on if I can play actual snippets of songs on here to add context to what I'm talking about, because I know not everybody who's listening may know, what the guitar solo in Calling Dr. Love sounds like. So if I could just sort of play that, but I have to talk, I have to do a little more research on if that's allowed. From what I understand, that since all of this is copyrighted music, I wouldn't be allowed to do anything with that, but I don't know. It's like I'm running a podcast that is not huge by any stretch of the means. I could likely fly under the radar, but I don't know. That's something I'm exploring. Going through my list of favorite Ace moments. These include solo songs. These include songs with Kiss that he sang on, songs with Kiss that he didn't sing on but may have penned. So we talked about New York Groove. That is the track on his solo album. That song was a single released from his solo record. I believe it went pretty high on the charts. Let me fact check this here, because we here at Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, we like to get our facts right. Let's see. Let me show you what I'm looking at so you don't just have to look at my mug. All right, so we got the Ace Frehley Wikipedia. They are asking for money, so if you're listening, go ahead and donate to Wikipedia. I'm not going to do that right now, though. They are persistent. Anyway, so we have here is just a photo of Ace. I was going to look at some of these later, but the iconic smoking guitar, big part of his image, big part of Kiss, the theatrics, and Ace, leaned into that tenfold. Smoking guitar that would shoot rockets. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but I wanted to find a little bit about his solo record. There's the Kiss makeup, which he designed, the iconic spaceman look. Let's see. So here it is. So it was a top 20 single in the United States. So New York Groove was a very successful track, and that's one of my favorite Ace tunes. I remember the day that he passed away. I put on his 1978 solo record and just sat back and enjoyed. And I think that's what a lot of people did. That's typically how we mourn these rock and roll legends. We let the music do the talk. Another one of my favorite Ace moments is the track Cold Gin that appears on the first Kiss album. It was a live staple. You know, this is a song that was written by Ace. He does not sing vocals on it. Gene sings on it. This was one of the I think the first run of Kiss is I don't have much negative to say about, those early albums, but I think their first album was a very solid work and Cold Gin just fits right in. Other tracks, 2000 Man, that is a song that is actually written by Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. I may have heard of them from the Rolling Stones. When I first heard the song 2000 Man, I didn't hear it. I was like, oh, that's a Rolling Stones cover because I just didn't have the knowledge of who the hell the Rolling Stones even were. So for me, it was, oh, this is a good song. And then when I get a little older and I start reading like writing credits, that's Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. I'm like, did they write this song for Ace was my thought, but no, it was the song that he had just covered, obviously. As you get a little older, you kind of realize we'll say the pecking order sort of things. Rolling Stones being legendary, I probably wouldn't write a song for Kiss. I don't really see that happening. Hard Times, I mentioned that off the Dynasty album. I believe it's on the back half of that album. I don't think it's the last song. Something I would just look on the record here, but I know for a fact the track listing on this Dynasty album is not correct. So the order it's listed in is Charisma, Dirty Livin', Hard Times. I believe this is alphabetical order. I don't know why they do that. So I don't know why they just put it on the order that it is on the album. But this is a re-release, not an original pressing, but iconic album cover. Some people speculate this isn't even Peter Criss on the album. That Peter was so checked out by this point they just painted someone else's face. But very well could be the truth. But as I mentioned off the top, Ace contributes a lot more on that album. Songs like 2000 Man, Hard Times, Save Your Love, really has some great guitar work on that one. His vocals are really strong and confident. But talking about Cold Gin, that's a song Ace wrote, but he was too shy to sing on those first several Kiss albums. He wouldn't want to do it. But a song that he would sing on, my Love Gun copies across the room, otherwise I'd go get it, is Shock Me. This comes from a story where he was electrocuted at a 1976 concert in Florida. He was going down a staircase, the story goes, and he grabs the railing and he's electrocuted. There was a live wire, or there was a current running through the railing somehow. I believe he was knocked unconscious. They had to stop the show for a period of time to, get Ace revived. And that's where the song Shock Me comes from. It's got that solid drum opening, and then it's the first time that we actually hear Ace's vocals. And you can hear several live versions of this. From Alive 2 is, one instance of it, through several of these. Kiss has done several off the soundboard releases, which are just full live concerts. I think they've done a really good job in the last 5 years of capturing the different eras. So they have a 1977 one from Des Moines, Iowa. That's original Kiss. They have one with Mark St. John from the 80s. They have one live in Poughkeepsie, which that is the one with Mark St. John, I believe, which is like 80. That's like Creatures of the Night, I want to say. They have a live off the soundboard on the Asylum tour, which features Bruce Kulick. They have a live at Donington, which is the reunion tour with the original four members in 96. And then they have a Tokyo one from 2000, and they have a 2004 live off the soundboard in Virginia Beach, which I do have that one, and I have the Des Moines one from 77. And that one features the new gen Kiss, we'll call them, with Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Tommy Thayer, and Eric Singer. So those off the soundboard releases are great, but I know on the Donington one, they do Shock Me. There's a couple other sort of deluxe editions of albums. I believe there's a Love Gun deluxe edition that has a Shock Me live version on it as well. So Shock Me, within his time in Kiss, is kind of like Ace's song. That's still when Kiss is going strong, with the Love Gun album, and they're incredibly popular, one of the most popular bands in the US at that point. And Shock Me is, a key feature in the Ace rotation. Looking back on his solo record, songs like Snowblind, which, not to be confused with the Black Sabbath song called Snowblind, I don't know what he could be talking about there. Songs like Speeding Back to My Baby, great guitar riff there. Driving down the road, 95 miles an hour. Maybe I should turn around. Maybe I should stop. Speeding Back to My Baby. Classic song. Love these songs. Songs that Ace doesn't sing on, but I still really love his guitar work on it. Calling Dr. Love. I really like his guitar solo on that song. I think he's got great bends, and the transitions from the track into the solo back into the track are really well done. I don't know how much of that we credit to Ace versus like our producer who's doing that. She on Kiss Alive and some of these early live albums. I was, prior to recording this, listening to the Dress to Kill, which is Kiss's third album, the 50th anniversary box set Kiss just released of that. They released they put a full live concert from Cobo Arena, which is from May of 1975, I think. And Cobo was partially where they snipped some of Kiss Alive from, because the live album Kiss Alive was not just one concert. It was several shows stitched together, a lot of overdubs to make it sound bigger and stronger. This whole talk about this is getting me excited to talk about Kiss Alive, because I think that's one of my favorite Kiss albums. So definitely, I want to get into that more someday. But the song She, which is off the album Dress to Kill, that's a fun one to play. I haven't really talked about the little guitar that I do play, Ace's impact in that arena. We will talk about that still. She, in these live shows, especially early in the 70s and through those first sort of 4 or 5 albums, Ace would solo off of She. It would lead into a big Ace, guitar solo. Those are just great to hear and really enjoyable. Detroit Rock City, another track that I wrote down. Those guitar parts, I don't know how many they're layering in there, but it's got a great build up. They often use this one to open the show. They did a whole movie called Detroit Rock City. I've actually never seen that, but would like to check that out someday. So that guitar solo, I remember learning that part, that ba-na-na-now, ba-na-na-na-na-na. Don't know. I know, Paul's a guitar player too. Ace is a guitar player. I don't know the split on who wrote this line, who wrote that line. I believe every member has a writing credit on Detroit Rock City, but Ace is definitely playing those parts on the track. So I loved when I played guitar more, which is sad to say. I need to get back into it. I need to pick it up more. I really enjoyed that little run, that little lick, that little portion of the solo there. More Kiss era Ace Frehley. They do an album in 1980, shortly after Dynasty, called Unmasked. This is the last album to feature all 4 original members until the reunion. They do a song, Ace sings a song on there called Talk to Me. That's a catchy one. Ace could write a catchy song. Talk to Me, All I Want Is a Little Conversation. That album is just, it's very poppy. It's very sort of, it's not their best work, I'll be honest, but there are some moments like Talk to Me. So then those are some of my favorite Ace moments within Kiss. Parasite, that is a song off the Hotter Than Hell album that he wrote. I love that riff, that ba-da-da-da-da, 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 ba-da-da-da. And that, I believe I've heard him say, was about a groupie who just would not leave him alone, like a parasite who's just stuck to his side. More of his solo stuff that I like. He's got a song called Ozone. He in that track, there's really nice, I'm just going to call them like big open chords. And then the riffs is just like a really good, like, it's got a great groove on that track. And he's got great things layered in with that groove that really come together. Rip It Out, another great song. I think his vocals are really powerful on that one. Rip It Out, Take My Heart. You wanted it from the start. You got it now. So goodbye. Rip It Out. Watch Me Die. Some of his more modern solo material is good as well. He's got a song called Foxy and Free, Outer Space. Those 2 tracks come off of his 2009 release entitled Anomaly. I remember my mom listening to those albums. Might have that somewhere. But I remember her listening to those tracks off Anomaly. And at this point in time, I'm not as into music as I am now. And what I mean by that is I do not know all my favorite artists' discography and the order and the year that these albums came out. So to me, this is just Ace Frehley music, which as like a 9, 10 year old, that might just be Kiss music. Like you could tell me that was a Kiss song and I wouldn't know any better. Like I can't, my ears just weren't developed enough to understand those differences. And so this modern Ace, that Anomaly album, I've never listened to it front to back, but I remember, she would put that CD in her CD player in that Chrysler Town and Country, and we would listen. I remember listening to those first two tracks, and I liked their sort of, especially with Outer Space, it's kind of got this little more brooding tones to it. And then looking at some of his, Frehley's Comet work, the song Rock Soldiers, I was slipping and sliding, drinking and driving. What's the line? Getting closer to hell or something like that. That's a fun one. Ace is back because I told you so. It's a fun little track. He does a cover of the Kiss song Hide Your Heart off of one of his late 80s releases with Frehley's Comet. Frehley's Comet was short-lived. I think it was around for a stretch in the 80s, and then I think a little bit of the chronology there is a little fuzzy. I don't even know if that's the right word. So yeah, there's two Frehley Comet albums, and then didn't perform live for 2 years until 1992. And then he kind of, just sort of made some guest appearances, played with Skid Row, just hanging out early in the 90s. And then of course the reunion comes about, and the rest is history. But love a lot of that Kiss Ace Frehley songs he wrote, didn't sing on, songs he sang on, his guitar riffs, his solo material. There's a lot of good material in there that I enjoy thoroughly. So talking about sort of my guitar playing, I took guitar lessons for several years, started taking guitar lessons I was in the 4th grade, and I took them up till I was about a freshman in high school. I have several guitars. I have just a basic shitty Line 6 amp, nothing fancy. I don't play in a band. During COVID is probably when I played my guitar the most recently. I would put covers on a YouTube channel I ran. And I just started playing more acoustic stuff. But starting my guitar lessons, I would go to a lesson every week. I would go with my teacher. And when you're starting, you have those books. You have those like Hal Leonard books. You have those music books that you're working through to learn the guitar. So my teacher, he would date mark the date, and he would, I have to learn like the Star Spangled Banner or Ode to Joy or something simple, just to learn, basics, finger placement, things like that, learning some chords. But eventually, the guitar lessons, they progressed to a point where I graduated from those books, and the lessons sort of shifted to, what do you want to learn this week? And that was cool because by learning different songs, we would try to tackle like a different song every week, or at least learn the main bones of it. And I wish I would just have taken it more seriously back then. I wish I would have committed to it more, because I do love playing music. I tried to jam a little with a friend over the summer, and this time I had tried like to write original stuff, write some riffs, and that was fun. Never really got off the ground, but thinking back on my guitar lessons now, I just remember he would sit down with a sheet of paper, my guitar teacher. He would have YouTube. He would pull up YouTube, whatever song I would say. We'd look it up. He would listen by ear, and he would write down, like the music staff, and he taught me all through tablature. So he would write down like the tabs of like what I'm supposed to play, and then would kind of learn it, come back, practice it. We'd come back next week, review where I was at. And that's where I learned a lot of the stuff I know. Now that I'm more of a casual player, I just play on, I'll go to Ultimate Guitar. And even now in the last several years, I've just song name, chords, and then I just learn the chords, sing along. So I would call myself like a campfire guitarist. I could bust out a guitar, play through some chords, have a little sing along. But that guy's like the worst guy to be at a campfire. You don't want to be that guy. So, but the first song, so once I graduated from these songbooks to actually like, what do you want to play? It was Love Gun by Kiss. There was a lot of Kiss tunes in there. I remember learning Rock and Roll All Night. I remember learning Detroit Rock City. And I still have these pages that my guitar teacher would write on. Your finger's going to go on this string, is going to go on that string. And there was a lot of Kiss in there, a lot of Ace, a lot of those notes. So a hard part for me, and something I did not grasp very well at the time was the solos. So we would learn the riffs and we would learn like, all right, here's what's played. And I don't remember it being really called this at the time, but like this is what's going on in the verse and then the chorus and like the song structure. And then I was like, all right, well, can we learn the solo? And my guitar teacher had tried to explain like, well, the solo, like that's more like it's recorded how it is, but you can improvise that. And here's, whatever, like we're playing in this, here's the chord structure, and then learning like scales, pentatonics, and things like that. That's kind of where my knowledge of guitar playing sort of dwindles and sort of drops off pretty significantly. So I never really, certain solos are so iconic that you do learn it, note per note. One of those for me was Detroit Rock City. That, not that this is for me to sing a cappella, but the learning that Ace is one of the big people that I wanted to play like. I wanted to play his material. I wanted to play Kiss songs and I play Ace Frehley licks and riffs and solos. And it's what I grew up listening to, and that's what I grew up wanting to play. Definitely, shout out Ace, shout out all the music he created, and his legacy is going to live on through that music and through his persona of the space ace with the makeup and the theatrics. He, on his guitar, one of the pickups, which is for non-guitar players, it's like that white box you see kind of. So if you have at your body of your guitar, you have the strings connecting to the bottom of the guitar there, and you'll have two like white blocks. I mean, there can be more than two, or there can be just one, but that's your pickup, and that's my guitar. My lack of guitar knowledge is going to be showing here, but it's where like the sound is being picked up at. And so when you see knobs like for volume or like tone, like those are connected to specific pickups. But Ace would knock one of those pickups out, and a smoke bomb would be in there, or he would shoot rockets out of the end of his guitar, or his guitar would levitate up, and there was lights all over it, and that's part of what Ace. That's part of Kiss. That's part of Kiss, and Ace embodied that, and he definitely put that on display very well. Something else that I'm just now thinking of, within the last 10 years or so, Ace has done a lot of good solo work. He's done several, I believe two, Origins albums where he covers a lot of classic songs. Off the top of my head, thinking of these songs, some of them include Lola by the Kinks, Good Times, Bad Times by Led Zeppelin, White Room by Cream. That's all I can think of, but he has two albums called Origins Volume 1 and Origins Volume 2. So if you like 60s, 70s kind of rock, but you want to hear them from an Ace Frehley perspective, those are available out there. I would definitely recommend checking those out. Ace has good covers. He even did an album, it might be on his Origins Volume 1, where he sang Cold Gin. He would cover some of those early Kiss songs, some of them, that he wrote. He even did a song with Paul Stanley called Fire and Water on his Origin. I think it's on Origins. It's on an album he's done recently, and the song is definitely called Fire and Water. And it was just cool to hear those guys kind of reunite on a track. So I mentioned I have never seen Ace with Kiss. That is true. I was not alive when they were playing together. I guess I technically was if he left the band in 2002, but I was not old enough to go to a Kiss show. But I did see Ace solo. It was the summer of 2023. He came to a bar called JD Legends. That is not too far from me. The set was a mix of his solo material, a mix of classic Kiss stuff. The outdoor area where the stage is at this bar is a sand volleyball court. So my toes are in the sand, and I was there, and we were listening to Ace jam out on this stuff. At this point, he's in his 70s, so you give a little bit of a handicap to, you're not expecting him to come out there and make up in like some tight outfit. You're not going to see that at 72 years old or 73 or 71 years old. And he might not be playing with as much energy or as fast or whatever, but he was there. And I think that's the important thing. And even when I saw Kiss those several times, it was just about seeing them and getting that opportunity to see that live. And that was an awesome experience. He had a really good band surrounding him. I remember liking his drummer. I want to say the drummer did some vocals on several tracks, which I'm always impressed by that when a drummer can sing. And play. And so getting that chance to see Ace was really cool. The So, looking at the set list here, shout out setlist.fm, by the way. So, he played Rip It Out, Rocket Ride, another great Kiss track of Ace's that was on Alive 2. So, Alive 2 is interesting because it had a mix of or it had a mix of live stuff, but then also some studio recorded tracks as sort of a tail end on that album. Played Speeding Back to My Baby, Parasite. He did play Love Gun, Hard Times, Detroit Rock City, not an Ace song, but I believe his drummer sang on that one. Like somebody sang on that one. He did a Thin Lizzy cover. He did God of Thunder, just the intro it says. And New York Groove, Shock Me, played a guitar solo, and then did a little Cold Gin, and then his encore was Deuce. I believe he wrote the Deuce riff, which that's an iconic track for Kiss fans. That's a common one that they would open shows with. So to put a bow on this, sadly passed away October of this year, 2025, at the age of 74. He was a legendary guitar player for the band Kiss. His impact is felt whether you know it or not. There's likely many of the bands you listen to, their guitar player, their sound influenced by Ace, influenced by Kiss. Countless number of guitar players picked up the guitar because of Ace. Another band I didn't really mention, but like Pantera, big Kiss fans. Skid Row, Kiss fans. Pearl Jam, those guys, the Kiss fans. Kiss's impact definitely felt through several different bands, huge in the 70s. And Ace, although he did not spend his entire career with Kiss, his fingerprints are on their signature sound. I mean, he designed their logo, big part of their look, big part of their whole sort of vibe and appeal. His solo work, best solo album of the four that Kiss released in 1978. He had just attitude. He represented rock and roll to me. He was somebody who, when you learn about his story, not having guitar lessons, but to see the success he achieved without a guitar lesson, it's inspiring. It makes you kind of realize I don't need to be a professional. I don't need to be a know-it-all when it comes to the guitar to be able to play the guitar. I just look at what Ace did. And, having watched somebody, I watched so many Kiss videos like I touched on YouTube growing up. I would design set lists in notebooks and just, here's what we're going to play at this hypothetical show that's never going to happen. We're going to open with this. And then what I would do, I would take this live set and I would swap around the CDs. So like, we're going from this track to this track to that track. And yeah, so watching those videos for hours and hours, playing my guitar, learning Ace's riffs. His passing was significant for me. It was surreal. I did not believe that he would pass on. Obviously, everyone's going to pass on at some point, but for it to happen so sudden and for it to happen the manner in which it did happen was a very tragic circumstance for me. You take time to reflect on the impact and just the memories of listening to that music, and the music will always be there. And, we can look back fondly on those years and those early years of Kiss, and we can always rewatch and re-listen and revisit. His legacy will always be there. And that's going to kind of do it here for Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Wanted to take some time to give tribute to the great Ace Frehley. Fly high, Space Ace. We know you're up there shredding away. So that's going to do it from this episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Wanted to give tribute to the great Ace Frehley. Keep an eye out for upcoming episodes of the program. Have another special guest lined up for episode number 43 that I'm excited about. So we'll be excited to look into that. And then, we're getting to the end of 2025 here. So I am planning also an end of the year sort of recap episode to let you know on the music I've been listening to this year and sort of some of my top artists from the year and sort of some of my top songs from the year and dive into some of that. For this episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, we are signing off here. Shout out to Ace Frehley, one of my faves. Thank you all for tuning in today and making it this far in the episode. And as always, never stop rocking.